Welcome to MOOC lecture on income inequality and global polarization. The question of inequality has been one of the major questions plaguing the humanities in the last 3 decades. Now the question comes, why? Only during the last 3 decades. Inequality was always there. And why the special focus and special interest to link inequality with global polarization? And there lies the effort to read between the lines. It is true that huge section of the population has been uplifted from below the poverty line. At the same time, it is noticeable that due to increase in population, the number of people below the poverty line has increased. To be clear, the percentage of people below the poverty line has decreased over the years, but the number of people below the poverty line is huge. Moreover, interstate conflicts, trade, wars in the recent years have complicated the journey towards poverty eradication. Is this journey towards poverty eradication a journey which has just taken shape in the last 3 decades? No. If we go to the history of India, benevolent kings have always taken steps to eradicate poverty. Now, this very phenomena of linking it with recent trends is a section of people who put them as left liberal humanists find that the political spectrum is changing over the years. And the people in power do not see eye to eye with them as far as the versions and narratives on different subjects are concerned. That's why there is an effort to link political globalization with inequality. In the post-COVID era, the situation of the poorest of the poor has deteriorated further. And who are the people responsible for COVID? Which are the countries responsible for COVID? What are the economic, political reasons behind COVID? So if we analyze all these things, we will find that inequality has risen. And as a result, it has created political, social, economic problems with new angles. These political, social, and economic problems were there before COVID, but it has taken new angles in the post-COVID era. The mission is to reduce inequality. If we go even to the directive principles of the state policy of Constitution of India, we will find that it speaks for reducing the gap between the rich and the poor. Each and all will support this, that there is a need to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. And there is also a need to reduce the gap between the rich countries and the poor countries. The economic output is unevenly distributed among the population, and this is a global trend. The gap between the rich and the poor is increasing. And it is not that it is increasing in few countries and decreasing in others. It is a global phenomena. And this has been a global phenomena earlier too. Over the years, across governments, this has been a trend. And we will find that political debates are created on issues which had been there for years together if the establishment in power is not seeing eye to eye with the dominant ecosystem. This is a socio-economic problem, this inequality, which is viewed as immensely harmful for economic growth, for sustainable development, for creating greater economic opportunities for all the people inside the country. And for this reason, it has aggravated the situation further, because in the post-COVID period, the economic opportunities have got some checks during the COVID period, and still now the entire economic setback has not been able to balance the problems it faced during the COVID period, and therefore still the economy is trying to set a balance and trying still to give it some time to pick up the space it had during the pre-COVID period. The gap between the quality of education given in elite institutions and the standard of education where mostly the underprivileged sections of the society goes is noticeable. And the effect it has on the opportunities, on skill development. Now, as we talk of knowledge society, skill is immensely important. And the privileged section of the society is getting better chances to master the skills needed for a knowledge society. And the students who are coming from underprivileged section is getting lesser opportunities to master the skill needed in this postmodern age. And this is also adding to this question of inequality. Income inequality has been typically examined, and typically examined only from economic perspective. However, it becomes more and more political in recent decades. And in recent decades, what we have found, that this is causing a wide range of detrimental political consequences. Growing inequality could undermine the social mobility, induce violent conflicts and general political tensions. This situation is conducive for the rise of not so democratic forces. The scholars have considered the political attitudes and political behaviors of the members of different political parties, and this has been a case where we have found that these political parties have been immensely influenced by the rising gap between the rich and the poor. The center to right political forces have accepted the need of a human face for the market economy. This logic is gaining strength. The so-called question of increasing social security schemes, the presence of greater economic inequality creates a situation where the center to left political parties who advocate radical welfare and try to promote populist economic agenda have gained ground amongst the working classes in many countries after the first half and mostly during the second half of the 19th century. In order to neutralize this trend, the center to right political forces have tried and have succeeded to create a balance by promoting the concept of huge social security measures for underprivileged sections, which have influenced the voting pattern to a great extent. The question of inequality amongst the members of the society have created stronger sentiment of relative deprivation. The growing poverty and greater inequality has resulted in enveloping the concept of in-group favoring strategies while reducing out-group interactions. The emergence of knowledge society, where skill-based competence is needed, has automatically created gap between the skilled and unskilled population. And the skilled population will be more and more beneficial by the policies of globalization, privatization, and liberalization. And the unskilled population will be at the receiver end to a great extent. The presence of a vibrant middle class is considered as a bridge between the underprivileged section of the society and the super rich. Middle class all along has played this role as a bridge in the society. Now, if the middle class is squeezed and the society more becomes like a pyramid, then it will lead to the rise of polarized political ideologies. Often the debates surrounds around party polarization and radical voting behavior in democratic countries. Therefore, naturally Western democracies get the privileged attention of the surveyors, and the findings they come up is mostly influenced by Western readings. Under these circumstances, efforts has to be taken up so that global analysis as far as inequality is concerned, and as there is a trend to link it with polarization, more particularly political polarization. In this perspective, different strategies are to be taken to measure inequality. Now, how we say a government has succeeded during its tenure to serve the people who have elected them? We have to center the debate on this question, where the gap between the richest 20% and the poorest 20% has reduced or not. If this gap globally can be reduced, the governments have succeeded. If this gap globally increases, the governments have to take note of this. Now, to keep a population dependent completely on government security schemes is not a very healthy practice. An individual has to be made competent economically so that he or she can take care of himself or herself. Now, political polarization takes place due to different reasons. It is not only economic, but also there are reasons which are social, cultural, historical, political. Traditionally, we measure the percentage of vote gained by political parties who are center to right and political parties who are at the center and at the center to left, and try to understand the mood of the society. But taking into consideration the pattern of voting, in most cases, the first past the post system is in practice. And in case of first past the post system, a government is often elected with a percentage of vote which is less than 50%. Therefore, when we try to analyze polarization, we have to analyze these different peculiarities which are there in the body politic. The issues, values, attitudes, beliefs which are important in case of Western democracies and which are playing a dominant role in case of Oriental democracies are not the same. Factors are different, people's choices are different, and it will not be right to judge the Oriental behavior always from Western perspective. And this has been done all through. And here, there is a limitation when we try to study inequality and try to link it with global polarization. When we go for a survey, what are the questions which come to our mind? Economic differences versus economic equality. Private ownership versus state ownership. People's responsibility versus government's responsibility. Competition or no competition. These are the questions which comes to our mind. And when we try to answer these questions, and try to judge that what happened during the last 30 years, income, inequality, and political behavior has increasingly garnered more importance. The widening gap between the richest and the poorest of the poor have closely been nurtured. And this has caused a pattern in political behavior. It is not to mean that the correction is the only way out and the correction only in the economic sphere. There are a correlation, but correction in social behavior, correction in political attitude, correction in cultural patterns are also needed apart from correction in economic policies. There have been differences in addressing the problem in the West and in the Oriental world. Over the past 2 decades, democratic behavior is changing in the global politics. The most common explanation offered by analysis ranging from the role of Oriental worlds and the role of Western democracies regarding the case of dealing inequality have to be studied in the context of a wide range of cases. In most of the developed countries, we have seen the precarious condition of the middle classes and the prevailing semi-feudal mindset amongst the developing countries. In most of the Oriental countries, the relations between inequality and political polarization is motivated by variety of mechanisms. In the West, where liberalization and industrialization have reached an advanced stage, there the democratic behavior of the people is different from the democratic behavior of the people in the developing countries. Opportunistic authoritarianism creates a situation to come to power via conventional political appeals, stressing on groupism for political survival. These attitudes, beliefs, and values have created in their own way in the very functioning of the democracies in the developing countries. We should understand that if the thinking of the society doesn't change, overnight the pattern of democratic behavior will not change. And if the thinking of the society has to change, then the history, particularly in Oriental countries, which has suffered during the colonial era, during the era of religio-cultural imperialism, has to be taken note of. And the onslaught they have experienced cannot be erased. That has to be accepted. And then only we can come nearer. If there is an effort to erase the colonial period, the economic discrimination, political violence which took place during those days, during the medieval period and during the colonial period, if we try to omit those events which took place during those years, will not save the situation for us. We have to learn from history, but we should not live in history. And democracy should be strengthened. Institutions on which democracy rests have to strengthen. And then only we will see that democratic behavior will be influenced by these democratic institutions. The democratic backsliding, I quote unquote within inverted commas this term, is a global phenomena. Even in developed democracies, the values, attitudes, and the beliefs which boost the democratic nature has suffered due to the global democratic recession, if we have to accept it. That has taken longer and starker political fallouts, and political analysts have debated the phenomenon and advocated for the world where the new reality should be integrator, inclusion, and acceptability of more democratic values, and it can reach by ensuring a pattern of society where the gap between the rich and the poor should gradually come down to a level where a decent standard of living can be ensured for each and all. If we are to ask for regional adverse groups of policymakers, and if we try to understand and analyze country wise, we will find that democracy and the term backsliding is applicable to the countries where there had been some democratic experiences. Now we would hear a wide range of consequences, and the experience of democracy in China, for instance, cannot be ignored. A country like China, do you think there had been any democratic backsliding? Do you think that there has been any proper democratic experience there? And digital development, the role of the social media, the development in the field of science and technology has influenced the process of centralization to a great extent. And we have to accept it. We can't ignore this scientific development. So, democratic value system and its analysis cannot be just for narrative creation. It has to be impartially judged. And if it is impartially judged, we will find that this immense backsliding which is propagated is not the complete story.